with these massive brick vertical supports, the original builders, contractors, would hand-hewn beams 24 inches or greater, 30 feet long and greater, and then mason them into these supports. So picture these massive beams from this wall through to that vertical structure, then on the other side, and then coming from north, south, east, west. So by 1784, they're sagging, they're maybe even rotten, maybe termites, and so the city of Charleston now owns the building, now is in receipt of the building and uses it for City Hall upstairs, and obviously City of Charleston is incorporated in August 13th of 1783. Is it 83? I think it is 83. And so anyway, they let loose a contract to do some work in the Exchange Building to stabilize it. And so a local architect and builder that's here for just a year or two, and he comes and he wins the bid. And his name is James Hoban, H-O-B-A-N. And Hoban immediately sees the problem with the original design, and he designs masonry walls here and ultimately separating the exchange floor into 3 separate rooms. James Hoban, 1784. 1784, James Hoban. And if you're familiar with the name, James Hoban goes on to design the White House in Washington, D.C. That's right, got to start right here at the Exchange Building in Charleston. James Hoban. And so fantastic. So behind this plaster, you're going to find masonry walls that date from about 1704. And then the building morphs a little bit more. You know, obviously the highlights upstairs, when we get upstairs, you know, we'll talk about the Constitution and these other incredible things, but then the building again morphs. And so you've got windows being added because you've got a clear space now. And so the breeze is no longer allowed to flow through freely, and so they start leasing space for different uses. And what y'all are leaning against is, of course, an original postal facility from Youmans Island, from Megan, as a matter of fact. And the entire southern wall of the Rebecca Mott Room, what is now the Rebecca Mott Room, looked like this in 1818. So picture a series of nail teller's cages on the south wall. And so they dig up the floor, they take up the Purbeck floor, and they install wood because it's easier on the feet. And of course, probably by that time, you had some masonry difficulties with the mortar mixture and maybe some other damage too. And so that in 1818 looked, and that's important to relate to, because at one point, I love that little illustration in there where we've got, and we're talking about the post office, because we were selected the finest post office in the United States. How cool is that? You know, the finest post office in the United States is right here at the Exchange Building in Charleston. And I'm pretty sure that even up into the American Revolution, we were still called the New Exchange, and ultimately the Old Exchange happens after about 25 years. 25 to 30 years, people started referring to it as the Old Exchange Building. It's just the longevity of the building. And ultimately it becomes the Old Exchange truly when the new Customs House is completed. The new Exchange and Customs House is completed in 1870, 75, 76, but it starts before the Civil War. This is a room today that we call, and it's known as the State Room. And it's called the State Room because, and you'll see it on the documentation that we use when we book the building, South Carolina State Society, Daughters of the American Revolution. This room is in honor of them. I won't go through all of it, but the really cool thing that you should talk about on your tours, if people are here, we have textiles here. And we have textiles from 1736, a pin cushion that belonged and used by Eliza Lucas. I mean, how cool is that? You know, one of the first steel magnolias in America is what we've got the waistcoat, now waistcoat and waistcoat, worn by Governor Moultrie upon his inauguration. We've got the waistcoat of Thomas Sumter, of course, the fighting gamecock on the occasion of his wedding. And then we also have the waistcoat of Henry Lawrence. And that's pretty cool too, who ultimately was was one of the presidents in Continental Congress. And so, Henry Lawrence was captured on the high seas, sailing to Europe seeking loans for the new colonial government, for the new continental government, the new United States. He's captured and imprisoned in the Tower of London. And he was such a great friend of George Washington that Washington would not allow Cornwallis, after the great generals surrendered at Yorktown, would not allow him to leave until Henry Lawrence was back on American soil. How cool is that? And we've got a piece of clothing that he used to wear. I mean, it's really, really fantastic. And then, of course, the consulars those are original paintings that were done. And, of course, again, we've got really, really fine collection, and about 95% of it belongs to the colonial dames. I mean, they've got a wonderful long name, the National Society of Colonial Dames of America in the state of South Carolina. And it's a wonderful long name, but a lot of this stuff. And what's really cool is, this is handed down from mother to daughter. I mean, and it's found in attics, it's found in trunks. I mean, this is cool stuff, and it's all owned privately. And I think that's just really, really fascinating. So, it should encourage you to take a look at your own genealogy and maybe what your mom left you. It might be pretty valuable. And if you're a fan like me of Antiques Roadshow, you never know. You never know. Every time I look at a vase or a pot, I go, hey, I start looking at the bottom. All right, come on. It's on the south side of the building. That's exactly right. There you go. So the other stairwell is the north stairwell. Yeah. That's of course, I call it the honeycomb hideout. It's kind of the bat cave, for the staff members to kind of go in and out. But what we've got is a series of documents, a series of different displays talking about the Second War of Independence. And of course, I don't know if y'all realize this, but a lot of work went into not only the origination of it, but the documentation, and it is in chronological order. So I don't know if y'all realize that these just aren't up there in happenstance. They're in chronological order. You start here, and you work your way around on the way up. And then you can start here and work your way down, and of course the war ends and Lee surrenders. So it's in chronological order. We've got some cool artifacts. This is a mortar round that was found, and I mean, look at that bad boy. It's 140 pounds. They still find these. I mean, what was this, about 3-4 months ago? A fellow was putting landscaping, watering in his property on James Island, and as he's digging the little trench, bam, he hits a mortar. And so he calls the police. The police call the Navy. The Navy comes with their demolition team and then recovers it and then defuses it because it is a live round. And you're not going to tell me that what happened last year, I think it was July or August, in the Ashley River. And it's one of the more fun stories. You can even incorporate it into your ghost story if you want to. But there was an explosion underwater in the middle of the Ashley River, just off of the Ashley River Marina. And the people that were working at the marina, people tied up to the dock, this massive wall of water, just bubble of water, just comes up. And just, I mean, it was 20 feet high. They talked about how massive it was. And they called the police. The police just cordon off the area. The Coast Guard shows up. They block off the entire Ashley River. And you know what I bet it was? Was a round from the Civil War that it finally degraded and eroded, and something set it off. And so thank God there were no boats. Thank God there was no A.G. Youmans out there drinking beer in his little Key West motor along at 15 miles an hour. That wouldn't have been cool at all. So again, it's in chronological order, and I think it's important. The document behind Darren is out of my personal library, and it is one of 100 copies that were made in 1960 by Walker Evans and Cogswell to commemorate, not celebrate, but to commemorate the signing of the Ordinance of Secession on December 20th of 1860, South Carolina leaving the Union. And I think it's telling too, because that's here, and South Carolinians from around the state meet in special convention to consider the question, and ultimately it is a unanimous vote, and South Carolinians leave the Union of the United States utilizing that document. And so interesting that it's here, simply because upstairs in the Great Hall, South Carolinians, representatives from around the state, meet in special convention in May of 1788, and we become a part of the United States of America.